You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today we're launching a new series focused on mental health, well-being, and resilience in research, commercialization, and intellectual property. This is critically important work that resonates throughout tech transfer offices, IP firms, legal departments, and any organization where professionals manage high-stakes decisions, tight deadlines, and complex technical challenges. Consider the landscape. Patent deadlines are non-negotiable. Licensing negotiations carry enormous financial consequences. Patent filings can determine a competitive position, and one missed deadline can jeopardize years of research investment. These are the daily realities for both IP attorneys and tech transfer professionals. The pressures are relentless and the stakes are real. That's where our guest comes in. Jane Wainwright has lived these challenges firsthand and emerged as a powerful voice for change. Jane spent over 2 decades as a patent attorney at Potter Clarkson LLP, one of the UK's top-tier intellectual property firms, ultimately becoming partner and head of the biotechnology department. During her time there, she specialized in complex life sciences and biotechnology matters, including recombinant technology, antibody therapies, drug screening assays, and gene therapy, coordinating patent strategies worldwide and representing clients before the European Patent Office. Jane knows the world of high-pressure IP work from the inside, but she also recognized that something had to change. She became a certified mental health first aider through Mental Health First Aid England. She pursued advanced coaching credentials from the University of Chester and built expertise in executive coaching, emotional intelligence, and organizational culture. Jane founded Starry-Eyed Pragmatics to work with IP and legal firms in building healthier, more sustainable workplace environments. And she stepped onto the advisory board for Jonathan's Voice, a UK charity dedicated to improving mental health throughout the IP profession, founded in memory of Jonathan McCartney, a patent attorney whose death by suicide underscored just how urgent this work has become. Jane brings a rare combination of technical expertise, real-world leadership experience, and genuine passion for making this field better. In our conversation today, we'll explore the mental health landscape in IP and tech transfer, examine what's actually driving stress, discuss evidence-based strategies for supporting well-being, and explore how leaders can create meaningful culture change. Welcome to the podcast, Jane. So excited to have you here on the air.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm really, really excited to be here as well.
Well, we're kicking off a new series on mental health, and I'm excited to have you here because you've had a very remarkable career in IP. You were a partner at a major firm. You headed a biotech department. You were an executive board member. And you've changed careers now. You've got your own company. You're focusing on mental health. What first made you become aware that mental health was becoming really a crisis in the IP profession? And how do you see some of those same pressures showing up for tech transfer professionals?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it depends on how you define crisis. And
Yes.
I think a lot of people will deny that there is a crisis. And actually, I would disagree with them. I think there is a crisis. And I think that's actually probably something that is prevalent outside of IP and tech transfer and in a lot of workplaces, but it remains hidden because there is still a stigma around admitting that you have a mental health problem or asking for help for that. So, I mean, how I got into the mental health advocacy, and then eventually working my way through to coaching and working in wellbeing has been very much around my own mental health, and having struggled with depression and anxiety kind of for a long, long time. So back into my teens and through university and then through my time in the profession, it's something that has been a part of my life for a long time. And I gradually kind of came to realize that as I got more senior in the IP profession, that never got any better, because different things kind of get into your life, different pressures. And so I'd always been of the kind of, oh, well, things will be better when I get to this point, or I'll pass this exam, or I'll get this case done, or whatever. And it just never really got better. And I kind of came to a realization that I probably needed help. And as I started to get help, actually started advocating more for other people to kind of notice what it is that they were experiencing and looking for help, and how I as an individual and how we as firms, as groups of professionals within the sector could support others. And I think that really is the thing that you see is the fact that people do, particularly in IP, people, they're perfectionists, so they keep at it with the work that they're doing. They keep pushing themselves. They work longer hours to make things better. There are deadlines, and I'm sure we'll talk about deadlines at some point, but that brings its own pressure. Within IP firms, particularly private practice IP firms, there's the pressure of making profits and keeping clients happy. Those bring pressures, and they're all a different stress that some people cope with really well, some people don't cope with very well. And you start to see individuals coping with different parts of that in different ways. And that's where you start to see that maybe it is a crisis, because people haven't talked about it. You see the effects of people then drinking or eating incorrectly, not exercising. You see those little physical and day-to-day manifestations, even if they're not admitting it. And I think maybe the last few years, it's a lot easier for people to speak out in every profession. And you start to see organizations making it clear that there are problems. You see surveys, you see reports that demonstrate that there are some real mental health and well-being challenges in the legal profession, and that includes IP and the associated areas like tech transfer.
Absolutely. And I think right now, given everything that's going on in the world and the stress associated with a rapidly changing world, and all the threats that we're facing every day, I think the stressors have gotten even more profound, both in the legal profession as well as for people in tech transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep saying the world has changed a lot, certainly since I began in the profession 20 plus years ago. But actually, even in the kind of the last 5 or 6 years, the world has changed drastically since pre-COVID. Just everybody's outlook on life changed with COVID. Political and economic uncertainty throughout the world, irrespective of what kind of side of the fence that you're on, things are difficult in a lot of countries and for a lot of people. And then you bring in the more recent changes of things like AI and the concerns that go with that in terms of, well, is that going to take people's jobs away? Is that going to put more pressure on people to be perfect? And really, really zoning in on that, honing in on the perfectionist nature of IP professionals.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned deadlines, and I want to talk about that a little bit, because there was a 2022 mental well-being survey of IP professionals in the UK that found that more than half of IP professionals had been adversely affected by stress, with a high percentage of those experiencing anxiety and depression, similar to what you explained you had gone through, and I've gone through that as well. And deadlines, high workloads, and client demands were the biggest contributors. And that's something constant in the IP profession, as well as something that's constant in the tech transfer professional as well. So in your view, what's driving these numbers, and are we getting worse, or is this something that we just all have to accept as just part of the job and is always going to be a factor?
I don't think we should have to accept that it is an inevitable part of the legal and IP sectors in any way, shape, or form. Things like deadlines, they are always going to be there. You're never going to get rid of deadlines. That is part of life. But there are ways to deal with that. But I think where we are is that people are more open generally. So it's certainly more visible that there are pressures that people find difficult. And I think actually as the IP world kind of moves on, the knock-on effects of getting something wrong, missing a deadline, for example, or getting the initial application wrong and not getting the claims right, it's just some small things that perhaps wouldn't have been so relevant, or so the impact wouldn't have been so relevant previously. Whereas nowadays you are looking at the value of IP becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and we talk about blockbuster drugs and some of the money that is involved in some of this IP. The consequences of getting something wrong become greater, and that adds a huge amount of pressure onto the IP attorneys and to tech transfer if it's a university or similar based or deriving inventions. So there is a huge amount of pressure to get it right, because those deadlines, if they are missed, can be catastrophic. But I think there's also, certainly from an IP firm perspective, workloads feel like they have increased. In the time I was in the profession, we went from, yes, we had email, but file wrappers weren't online, to everything needing to be instantaneous. And I think that creates more work in itself, because everything can be done quicker. And everybody expects it to be done quicker. Clients expect it to be done quicker. Colleagues expect it to be done quicker. Patent officers expect it to be done quicker. And that always on thing has gradually crept and become worse and worse and worse through that kind of 20-ish years that I was in the profession. So I think high workloads have definitely worsened. I think there's also a kind of a difference between the types of environment you're working in and the countries that you work in as well. So I know that the pressures in terms of workloads are higher in the US, in big law firms, and then compared to the UK, for example, or even compared to small law firms within the US or smaller law firms in the UK. So the amount of stress from things like workload will vary depending on where you are. So there are a huge number of contributors to all of these things. And see, it's really hard to pin down one thing and say, yes, that's the problem. That's what we fix. And I genuinely think that we shouldn't have to sit and say, this is how it is, because it doesn't need to be like that. There are factors that you can't change, and there are attitudes that are very entrenched in terms of, well, I did it, so you have to, or
yes.
You have to reach a certain amount of profitability, so that requires you to work all of these hours. Those attitudes can change, but that's the kind of thing that's more difficult.
Now, you mentioned something that I've seen a lot, which is getting it right. And I've seen this in the context of patent attorneys and tech transfer offices working together. And you might, tech transfer office might get a disclosure with only a couple of days before there's going to be some type of publication, and not a whole lot of time to evaluate, is this something that is really going to be valuable or not? And we have this impending deadline, and working with the attorney and either filing like a cover sheet provisional or a very bare bones application, only later to find out it is that blockbuster or is that super important invention. And then, everybody, is stressed, is an upset. And, I've seen a lot of mental health concerns raised over that. And frequently what I tell people is, you made the best decision you could at the time with the information you had available. But that's something I see people, colleagues and people in the tech transfer profession constantly beating themselves up over. And I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and that absolutely comes back to that we all have those perfectionist tendencies.
Exactly.
The IP and tech transfer definitely attracts people that are perfectionists by nature. And it's hard to get your head around not doing the best job that you could if you had infinite time, compared to when you only have a day or a week or even a month in some cases. I was always told the kind of the story, and it was around costs, but it works for time as well. That in relation to costs, if a client wanted a Rolls-Royce job, but they were only willing to pay for a Mini, then they couldn't get a Rolls-Royce. So the same goes for time. If you're only given the time to build a Mini, you're not going to get a Rolls-Royce built in that time. So we have to learn to take a step backwards and look at things a little bit more objectively. And that's somewhere actually having good support within your own organization can be really helpful, so that you can kind of vent a little bit to your colleagues and be able to say, oh God, I've only had this much time, and yeah, this hasn't gone well. But they're the people that have been through it as well, and who can reassure you that actually, no, you have done the best that you possibly could with the resources that were available to you at that time. And as long as everybody's aware of that, as long as client, attorney, every party involved in it knows that, well, we didn't have enough time, or we didn't have enough money, or we didn't have enough data, whatever the limiting factor is, as long as everyone kind of is aware of that at the outset, then you can't change what happens.
Absolutely true. And, I want to talk about workload because that plays into this as well. And that was something interesting in that 2022 study as well, because it found that almost 2/3 of the respondents cited having too much work to do, and that being a big barrier to take time off. And I have to say, you're in the UK, I'm here in the US. That is a huge issue in the US is people taking time off to rest. They're too overworked to take a vacation, or they don't have time to rest. They work on weekends and they work late, they work early mornings. And that really ends up making people less effective. And that then contributes to this sense that my workload is overwhelming. You were on an executive board that was involved in HR initiatives. And I'm curious what kind of structural and organizational changes you found actually make a difference when it comes to reducing this workload stress, as opposed to things that are just kind of surface level wellness initiatives.
Yeah, those surface level wellness things, like here's some yoga classes.
Yeah,
or here's
exactly.
Some fruit basket.
I don't have time to go to a yoga class. Yeah, exactly.
They're great and they're a nice bonus, but they don't fix the problem.
Exactly.
In all honesty, the thing that I truly believe that is the most useful in terms of managing workloads is having teams involved. You see too many people, particularly at senior levels, that kind of become very siloed, and it's their project, it's their client, it's theirs, and only they can do it. And they're really reluctant to bring others into that work or that particular relationship. And they may delegate to a junior person, but don't want a senior person, because a lot of people, particularly for attorneys, you're measured on income, you're measured on KPIs that relate to number of hours, money, all of those things. So you don't want to lose that, because you're being measured on that and you're being remunerated on that. So it's understandable that people want to hold on to work, or believe, with the perfectionist tendencies that we tend to have, that they're the best person for the job. But actually, from my perspective, the thing that I see working best in the service of well-being, in the service of firms, in the service of clients, is building effective teams. Because if you have not just one senior person involved on a project or with a client. You have multiple senior people. If you have that scenario, well, all of the burden of meeting urgent deadlines doesn't have to fall on one person. So you can spread the work better. So at the very least, even if the same amount of work and the same amount of people are there, you haven't got one person completely overworked and somebody else sitting there twiddling their thumbs because they don't know what to do, which in itself gives a stress around that I haven't got enough to do. I'm not going to be assessed well. And I know it's something that's very different between the UK and the US, that the UK, we tend to have been a little bit better at building those teams. And that does allow us to take time off because you know that there's another partner or senior associate, a qualified person that knows the client, that knows the cases, the projects, and can step in. Even if they haven't necessarily worked on a specific case, they can step in, pick it up, deal with something urgent, and it becomes pretty seamless. And that teamwork, that team building is better for the well-being. You can take time off, knowing that you don't have to work while you're on vacation. It's good for the client because they've got multiple points of contact when you're away, or if you're sick, if you get run over walking down the streets.
Let's hope not.
God forbid die. Well, at least the clients are going to be okay. Because somebody else is familiar enough. So it's all about building a resilience into the system that helps everybody.
Yeah, really, really important. I'm curious, in larger firms and larger tech transfer offices, there are those numbers that you can rely on, those teams you can build. What have you seen in terms of smaller law firms and maybe smaller tech transfer offices where maybe there's only 2 to 3 people? How do you handle this kind of overwhelming kind of workload, so to speak?
I think it's about remembering you don't have to do everything. There's always another option. So for a tech transfer office, there is always the option of outsourcing something to an attorney that they can help with, or finding somebody that you can bring in on a temporary basis.
Yeah, student interns maybe.
Yeah, and figuring out what it is that you're doing that you don't need to be doing. Are you doing all of the things that maybe an executive assistant could do instead? Scheduling your own meetings, all of those tiny little things that take up time. So being critical of what you're doing, that's one way that you can deal with it as a kind of a sole practitioner or a small team. You're never going to get away from everything. So particularly if you're on your own, there is no way of getting away from all of it. So you have to do the best you can. You have to meet the deadlines that are essential, and you have to prioritize those. You have to deprioritize stuff that is less important. Remembering that you need to tell the people that you are doing that for that it is less important, and that's being deprioritized. They think it's more important, then they have to say so, or they have to find another route to get it done. I think for me, the biggest problem for people that work in very small teams or on their own in particular is kind of that support network and knowing who to go to if you just want somebody to talk to. Because of all of the confidentiality stuff that goes on with IP work, it's hard to go and take a particular case to someone outside of your own organization. I think that is harder to deal with, but that is where sometimes organizations like Alton can provide at least a sense of community, even if you can't take a specific problem. So at least you've got somewhere to go to kind of talk through things hypothetically with people from that network. But actually it's somewhere where getting professional support in terms of therapy if you're not coping well, or coaching in the sense of I need to bounce some ideas off somebody and think things through properly. So that kind of external professional support can help, and that is then necessarily confidential, so you don't damage the kind of the IP confidentiality and that goes with the day-to-day work.
So I mentioned earlier that you were part of a big law firm. You were the head of a department. You were on an executive committee. But you've transitioned away from all that and you've founded Starry-Eyed Pragmatics to focus on coaching and well-being in legal and IP firms. Talk to us a little bit about what made you make that transition. That's a pretty big jump.
It's a massive jump. It's very, very different. As a senior leader in the firm that I was in, I found that the way I led was very much focused on people. It was always about how can I support the people in order to reach the aims of the organization. And I found that for me, that the more and more that I kind of wanted to support the people, the more interested I was in people stuff. And I got quite a lot of experience in doing that and supporting HR initiatives and leadership development through being on the executive board, because clearly having more senior conversations, you get involved with more things. And I just found that I really enjoyed those things. And I was asked to set up and run a development program for more junior partners to help ready them for more senior partnership and actually running the business. And when we set that up, I did the program with them to kind of test it out, and found that by doing that program, and part of the program was being coached by an executive coach, and I found that just super helpful in understanding myself. And by understanding myself through that, I was encouraged to then do some training in coaching, and then found that actually I could use that to help my leadership within the business. And then I just got to the point where it was kind of like, that's more interesting to me than the IP side of things. And it's not that the IP side of stuff was awful. Just felt like I've got more that I'm interested in and can give that's outside of a single IP firm. So took the decision to effectively take early retirement, a very early retirement from patents, and find a new career path. So as of the beginning of this year, I stopped being a patent attorney and have taken some time off and taken some time to just enjoy life, and then gradually working on and building up this new business of my own to support IP firms and legal firms in their people journey, because I think IP is perhaps a little bit further behind general law in terms of the people side of things. But I just can't stress how much I believe that the people are the fundamental building blocks of everything, including increasing profitability. So if you get your people stuff right, if you support people, you develop them, and you coach them in a way that they're engaged and enjoying what they're doing, for me, it's inevitable that they will do more work, they will enjoy their work more, and businesses will be better and more profitable.
I have been in IP firms my entire career, and I agree with you. The people part of it is not something IP firms do really, really well at all. And, it leads to a lot of mental health issues. You and I have seen colleagues with it. And, I found it very interesting that one of the things that you have become involved in is something called Jonathan's Voice, which is a charity that was founded in the memory of Jonathan McCartney, a patent attorney who died by suicide. And this is something that does not get discussed at all in patent firms. In fact, in my opinion, at least what I see in the US, it kind of gets swept under the rug. But what's really amazing about this charity is that it works to reduce the stigma, and it empowers people to speak up. And that is a huge problem. You alluded to that earlier about the stigma with mental health. So I'm curious, having been a leader in a firm and now with your own business, from a leadership perspective, how do you help leadership, particularly senior leaders and maybe direct heads of TTOs, understand that supporting mental health isn't soft, and it's actually something that's very important, as you've been talking about, in building these high performance, resilient individuals as well as organizations?
I think a lot of it is meeting them where they are. So a lot of senior leaders in IP firms, in legal firms, in professional services, full stop, the senior leaders tend to be towards the end of their career. That tends to be a little bit older. And I don't like to generalize generations, but you do see differences in thought processes because of different levels of experience and experiences in the world for different generations. And I think that the kind of the current generation of senior leaders, the generation that is kind of moving to retirement over the next 5-10 years, that's the generation that is kind of not 100% understanding of mental health challenges. They're aware of it, but don't necessarily get it. And I think that's where we have to meet them where they are. So we kind of know that they are aware that these things exist, and they kind of know that it isn't good, but knowing what to do about it is the thing. So I find that trying to talk to them in terms of what it is that they want from their businesses, what it is they want from their lives, is the way to start the conversation. So if you're thinking about senior leaders in a private practice law firm, profitability is realistically their biggest goal, increasing and maintaining their profitability of their firm. So starting from an evidence-based approach with profitability can be helped by supporting mental health, by supporting well-being, by developing your people, whatever part of the people spectrum you're talking about. Profitability can be helped by supporting those. And there is evidence out there. There's papers, there's reports, there's research showing that the better you treat your people, the more you develop them, the happier they generally become, the better you look after their well-being, the more engaged they are, the more productive they are, and therefore that inevitably leads to improved profitability. So knowing what it is that their goals are and then kind of working backwards from that, I find is the most useful approach. And that's for the current level of senior leaders. There's also thinking about the senior leaders for 5 years' time, and they're generally a little bit different. They are a lot more aware of mental health challenges and a lot more open about things. And so you have to keep adapting how you approach them and support them. But I think ultimately it just comes back to that, meet them where they are. And a lot of that comes from having empathy, having compassion, high emotional intelligence, thinking about what it is that other people are experiencing and seeing it from their world, and not just assuming that they experience it the same as you, because they don't. Whether that's a different generation, a different individual. I see the world differently to you, Lisa, and you see the world differently to every single one of the listeners. So just by taking the time to put yourself in the shoes of who it is that you're trying to influence and work with, and being curious about what their view is and their worldview and how they approach things, that can help shape the approach to tackling any issue, but especially something that is difficult to get people on board with, such as well-being and mental health.
Absolutely. So it's really, again, about creating this culture where people feel like they belong, and that if they are having a mental health challenge, they feel that they can be open and express how they're feeling. And that seems to me always to come from leadership. When I've seen leaders in firms or in tech transfer offices share that, they've had a mental challenge, because we all have them. It starts to create this culture where people feel like, hey, it's okay, to talk about this instead of bearing it because I might be stigmatized.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that role modeling is really important, because a more junior individual in any environment is going to find it difficult and scary to bring up their challenges unless they know that the environment is one that's safe. And you often hear about psychological safety, and I think that it does underpin a lot of this, is that if leaders can create a psychologically safe environment, if their business, if their organization is psychologically safe, then you make it easier for everybody to bring the difficult parts to work. You don't have to bring everything, because not everything belongs in the workplace. But to bring the difficult things, if you feel that you are not going to be penalized for sharing that. And that's fundamentally what psychological safety is, that you feel safe enough to know that you can say or do something that is not going to be held against you. So role modeling by senior leaders is really important part of that, because if a senior leader can say, you know what, I've had depression, or I've suffered from stress, or I'm going to take a day off because I worked late the night before on a case, so I'm going to take a day off, or I'm going to come in late because of that. Simple little things like that, role modeling it makes other people realize that that's okay, and that builds a psychologically safe environment.
Absolutely. We were talking about wellness programs before, yoga, things like that. I'm curious, beyond those traditional type of wellness programs, what have you seen that actually helps professionals manage their stress, build this resilience that we were talking about, and maintain sustainable careers in these very high pressure environments?
I think the psychological safety that we were just talking about, I think that's a really big part of it. That if every individual contributes a tiny bit to that, of making everybody else around them feel safe to share who they are or whatever parts of themselves that they want to share, that helps a lot in terms of coping with the inevitable stresses and strains of life, let alone work. And so I think that's a really big part of it. I think trust is also a really big part of it as well. And knowing that as a junior person, that your senior leaders trust you to do the work, to get on with things, to meet a deadline, that makes life less stressful if you are trusted. And vice versa. No, senior leaders need to be trusted by the rest of their team, their organizations. The team, the organization need to know that the senior person has their best interests at heart, not their own. So it's very much about what's best for the organization, what's best for the team, what's best for the staff. How do we get the right thing for clients? That's really important at reducing stress levels and making sure that people do engage with what they're doing. And I think actually the role modeling of all of these things, role modeling of taking time off is important. Role modeling of not working in the middle of the night. And I know some people work at different times. So if you're somebody that does work in the middle of the night, making it clear to everybody you work with that you don't expect a response to an email that you've sent at that time, and showing them that actually, well, you might work at midnight, but you're not working in the middle of the day for 2-3 hours because you don't work well then. So not going over the top on the amount of time that you are working. So role modeling everything that is a good behavior for the team. And I think those are the things that I've seen work best. And actually stuff like the role modeling, that builds trust, which builds psychological safety. Psychological safety builds trust, which means that people feel safer. Role modeling. So they're all in this massive kind of interrelated spiral. So, I mean, all of those come back to, as I said earlier, emotional intelligence. Working on emotional intelligence and developing it and using it is the best way to deal with well-being in the workplace. There is nothing better, in my opinion. You can put as many fruit baskets, yoga classes, all of those things, birthday leave, they're all great and they create a small feel-good buzz when they happen. But that's not a sustainable feel-good and well-being change. Actually, it's the behavior as a whole that matters for improving well-being. And that has to come from senior leaders.
And I think when it comes to emotional intelligence, at least I have found for myself, it's something I have to work on all the time. It's kind of always evolving, as you work with different people of different generations. Your emotional intelligence for one generation isn't necessarily applicable for another one, just like with people in different countries. So I think an important thing, at least I've learned, is that your emotional intelligence has to evolve over time, and you need to work on it all the time as well.
But that's the great thing about emotional intelligence. It's not fixed. It's not IQ. It's not a stationary number of this is how intelligent you are. Emotional intelligence is so many different aspects. Some of them are about how you interact with others. Some of them are about how you view yourself. But you can work on every single one of them and improve the ones that are most relevant. And that also means you can lean into the things that you're good at. So some people are just naturally good at empathy. So lean into it, understand what other people are thinking and feeling, and use that to your advantage. I always felt that writing an office action response was more psychological than it was factual, because I needed to persuade the examiner. And it wasn't so much about whether I had the right facts to do that. It was, how was I phrasing it? Was I giving them a way to climb down from an objection if perhaps they'd got backed themselves into a corner? So there's different bits of emotional intelligence you can bring into the role that we all do in IP, whether that's as an attorney or tech transfer. So yeah, emotional intelligence you can work on, and that's brilliant. And you can take assessments to find out where you are strong or less strong, and where you might want to work on that.
Now, Jane, given your new role and all that you've been working on since you left law firm life, what gives you hope? And do you think the culture as it relates to mental health is starting to shift or maybe not shift?
I think it's definitely shifting. I think the fact that charities like Jonathan's Voice exist, I think the fact that we're having this conversation in the first place on a podcast that will be released into the wild and to anybody that wants to hear it, the fact that these things exist means that the culture is evolving. And I think that in itself is kind of the first building block of hope, that things have changed, which inevitably means they'll keep changing because people like us will keep building on that. We'll keep having the conversations and drip feeding to other people that it is okay and that there are conversations that they can have. And then gradually those ripples keep moving. So culture is definitely changing and will keep changing. And I think I'm hopeful that as the generations change, and again, I really don't want to blindly sweep across generations, but I think as time passes, different attitudes will gradually come to the fore as they get more senior. And I think we all know that people that are kind of just entering the professions right now, and that just leaving university and just starting out their career journeys, are very, very interested in well-being and mental health. And that can only inevitably impact on the conversations that are being had, but also on the culture within businesses. And as those ripples start to spread, that will inevitably impact on senior leaders, whether they believe in it right now or not, because they'll get to a point where they might not have a workforce otherwise if they don't. And I think that gives me hope that some of it might be a little bit out of desperation ultimately, but gradually the good word will keep spreading and it will keep filtering out and it will change. But it isn't immediate. It isn't going to be fixed next year. It will take time. And it takes culture change. And you look at particularly US law firms, even with newer generations that are more focused on health and well-being, it's still a really difficult thing to integrate into cultures that are very focused on high workloads and profitability.
Well, Jane, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much today. Really appreciate you being on the podcast. And thank you for all the very, very important work you do. This has been really, really great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this conversation today. You've given us something rare today. Honest insights from someone who has worked at the highest level of the IP profession and now dedicates her time to making it healthier and more humane. If you're listening and work in IP or tech transfer, some of what Jane shared may have resonated. Maybe it even hit close to home. If you're a leader in your organization, the message is clear. Mental health and organizational performance aren't separate concerns. They're connected. Building a culture where people can do their best means creating an environment where they can also sustain their well-being. For more information about Jonathan's Voice, the Mental Wellbeing Survey, or to learn more about Jane's work with Starry-Eyed Pragmatics, visit the Autumn on the Air podcast website. This is the first in a new series on mental health in research, commercialization, and IP. We'll be bringing you more conversations with leaders, practitioners, and advocates who are working to transform culture in this space. If you have colleagues or experts you think we should talk to, we would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to Autumn on the Air. We'll be back next week with another conversation about the people and issues shaping the future of research commercialization. Until then, take care of yourself.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.